Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan and welcome to a special edition of Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. Today, my special co-host is prolific comic book writer and novelist Cullen Bunn.
Hey, how are you?
Cullen is the writer for The Sixth Gun, and he recently finished Fear Itself, The Deep, and he just released the first in a new teen horror book series called Crooked Hills, which I just read and really liked. And Cullen and I are going to talk today a little bit about the book and also about what the market is like for teen books these days on the whole, and specifically what it's like to write for that market. And since Cullen is working on that, I thought it would be really interesting to get into that now. Cullen, the first thing I wanted to ask you is specifically about the book. How did you approach plotting and characterization for this? What I'm really interested in is whether you focused on having to write for that particular audience, or if it was more about just what you would basically do with a story where you go, okay, I'm writing a teenage character, so I'm realistically writing from that teenage perspective. Which angle did you have to go from?
It's I think I didn't necessarily sit down and say I'm writing for a teenage audience or for a middle reader audience, so I have to write in a certain way. I kind of sat down and just started telling the story I wanted to tell. And I think a lot of what I do anyway, in terms of my prose, I write in a way that I think it has this sort of all ages appeal, unless I really go for something that I think I have to intentionally write for a more mature or adult audience than I do intentionally have to intentionally write for a younger audience. I think my natural comfort zone in prose kind of lends itself to the teenage or middle reader audience. So I just sat down and said, hey, I'm going to write a fun story, a story that's going to have some humor in it, but also some real scares. And I didn't worry so much, especially in that first draft, about the age of the audience.
I find every time I sit down and try to write something that's like really, really super adult, it just comes out silly. I don't know if you have that, but that's me. If I try to make it like really adult, I'm just like, no, that's dumb. It's not worth it.
Well, I don't have that voice. Well, I've written a lot of stuff that I would never let a kid read. I would not encourage a kid to read. I've got a number of short stories out there that are definitely for mature audiences only. Mm-hmm. And I've written some stuff that is definitely not for kids but is also not for a mature audience. I've written some stuff that's pretty graphic and horrible, but it's definitely not something that a mature audience would appreciate. It takes a certain kind of immaturity to appreciate some of that stuff.
And I think it would be unfair to say that Crooked Hills is too tame or anything like that. Like, it's certainly for that audience, or at least it seems like it's very, very appropriate for that teen audience. But I was really impressed with how good you were at just doing kind of the campfire story kind of, or at least that's kind of how I saw it, a sort of mode where it was like you get to a point where something really scary might happen, and then it doesn't happen, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and after a while you get comfortable, and then something creepy really does happen.
It's kind of what I was going for with it. I wanted to. I
found it very subtle.
Yeah, it's kind of a horror movie tactic. Is you build up, and then you kind of let the viewer breathe for a second and kind of relax, and then you wait until just the moment where they're comfortable. They get comfortable with that rhythm, and mm-hmm. then you spring it on them. You hit them with something for real.
Yeah, and it scared me for a minute because when I was a kid and I was reading, other horror book series that were, middle reader or teenage horror book series, they would, some of them were kind of one note where they would do that, but that's all they do.
Yeah.
So, like, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where like it was just simply like somebody walks into a room and it looks like something bad might happen, but it's
It's really my cousin wearing a monster mask.
Yeah, exactly. And every time, and you get to the point where it doesn't feel like there really are consequences for any actions, and you never really buy that bad things happen to anyone.
Well, yeah.
And in this, it became clear very early that we were in a world where bad things really could happen to people, even though it was being told from the perspective of a teenage kid. I really appreciated that.
Well, yeah, I wanted to. Some of the things I wanted to do with the book is, I love horror fiction, and I think it's a long-standing and respectable genre, and I wanted to kind of give these readers who maybe this is their first experience with horror fiction or real horror fiction. I wanted that respect to show through, and I wanted them to understand. I wanted to kind of build this understanding of the genre, and from that perspective, at least, I wanted it to be a real horror novel at the end. And I think as the story unfolds and when it all nets out at the end, I'm not gonna say it's a completely happy ending. It's. Mm-hmm. Then, like there are definitely consequences.
Actually, it's not. And of course, I know you can't tell me this, but like there's a major thing that happens at the end where I'm like, okay, this must come back later. Because if it doesn't, I will be super disappointed.
Well, yes, in the series, it's planned for a series of books, and right now I'm thinking, 4 or 5 books. I would love to do more. I could tell stories in the Crooked Hills universe, I guess, for years to come. But yes, not only are there there are repercussions from the end of the first book that will kind of carry throughout the rest of the series. So yes, those the bad things do come back to bite you. And that's
and I would be, like I said, I would be super disappointed if it didn't, because honestly, I won't give anything away, but I felt like at the end the protagonist was maybe a little bit naive. And I mean, being the age he is and going through what he goes through, that makes a lot of sense. But at the end, I found myself going, I don't think he really understands the weight of what just happened.
He doesn't. And when we get to the second book, he starts to understand it a little bit more. And by the third,
I mean, he makes decisions that are really, honestly, kind of ethically ambiguous, I think.
Well, yeah, but and
which is good, and I'm not. I mean, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying I don't think he quite realizes that.
Yeah, he doesn't. And the more as the series progresses and as the other books come out, he and his friends will start to really understand what has transpired and what there's a cost for everything, and they're going to learn that in a big way.
And I mean, the mythos surrounding everything you've kept really mysterious. I mean, you keep the reader in the dark pretty much through the whole thing, where it feels realistic and it feels like there's got to be some logic behind it, but I don't feel like we ever entirely understand exactly what's propelling the supernatural in this book. I think it's fair to at least come out and say there are supernatural things that happen in the book. If you don't mind me at least saying that.
Yes, this is not a Scooby-Doo story.
Again, I don't want to give anything away, but yes, there is definitely a major supernatural component to it, and so when I got to the end of the book, I found myself going, okay, is everything going to go back to the one mystery we had here with the questions about the witch and the rock and all that, or are we going to have like a different one that we do every book and then eventually that comes back?
Everything kind of ties together, and
okay.
And I think
it sure felt that's where it was going.
Yeah, one of the things I enjoy doing in comics and in prose is I like world building, mm-hmm. and I like making these connections and building some things that may not necessarily be completely overt right at the beginning, and maybe not even as the story progresses. I just want to weave these connections back in. So I'm in the I've started writing the second book in the series, and there are even connections now that I'm discovering as I'm working on this on the first draft that I didn't even plan for. But that's part of the joy of writing is discovering those little connections that you never really expected.
I wanted to ask you where you got the what exactly inspired you town-wise, because I know at the back of the book it says that you grew up in some small towns, kind of like Crooked Hills. Are there like specific towns that you thought of when you were writing this?
Oh yeah, I lived when I was very young in a town called Newton Grove in North Carolina, and Newton Grove has a.
See, even that sounds potentially creepy, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, but I just remember. Growing up in Newton Grove, and I was young. This was, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. There was a lake out behind our house, a few acres back behind our house. And I guess it's important to know I grew up with two brothers and a sister who are all at least 10 years older than me. So I think they had, took great delight in terrorizing me. And they told me stories about a kid who drowned in that lake and would crawl out at night and go around looking through town, dripping water everywhere. And I remember my older brother told me about a UFO that came spinning through town late one night. I remember one of my brother's friends putting on a gorilla mask and running through the cornfields and scaring the hell out of me.
See, that's classic. Everybody needs something like that in their past.
I remember this is a point of controversy with me and my parents, because I remember we lived in an old farmhouse, and I remember very clearly looking out the back window, and we have an apple tree sitting out behind our house. And I remember very clearly a man crawling out from under our house, going and picking an apple off the tree, and then crawling back under the house.
Really?
I remember it so clearly, and I remember my dad going under the house and seeing where he had been camping out under the house. But they, to this day now, we talk about that, and they don't seem to remember it. They think I dreamed it, but I remember it so vividly. This whole experience of this guy picking the apple off the tree, that if it's a dream, I have convinced myself that it is real. And
wow.
My parents don't seem to remember it, though. But yeah, so I lived there, and then, I lived in some other towns where there were a lot of, I was surrounded by woods, and I spent a lot of time exploring the woods with my friends and making up stories about things we'd see in the woods. And then when I was 18, my parents moved to Missouri, to a town called Thayer, which was right in the middle of the Missouri Ozarks, and it was on the Missouri-Arkansas border. And Crooked Hills has a lot to, is all of these towns kind of combined. But a lot of the experiences Charlie has are things that kind of happened to me, even though I was older. They were things that happened when I moved to Thayer or followed my parents to Thayer. And then I just kind of re-envisioned them as if I were younger, if I were 13, what would that be like?
Yeah, and Cullen, your descriptions are really vivid. I mean, I could tell that a lot of stuff seemed to come directly from a place. It didn't feel, a lot of it certainly didn't feel like, you just sat down and made stuff up. It felt very much like, what the best stories usually are, is you take something from your own experience and you build on it and you embellish it, and you have that in spades in that book, which I really appreciated.
So much of that stuff are things that either happened or I could easily envision happening, or I heard someone else, tell me, 100 times this story about things that happened to them. So yeah, I try to pull a lot of that from, I don't necessarily believe in the write what you know, because if that were the case, I wouldn't be writing, stories about ghosts and superheroes and everything else. But I do think, there's a way to ground what I'm writing with, by, connecting it to some of these actual things, and some of the detail from the events that I describe in the story are because I was pulling detail from real things.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, that's as much of a myth as show don't tell. Right. I mean, you have to do some telling. There's no way around it.
Right.
Exposition is important, So a lot of those big blanket statements are there to get people doing things the right way, and then after a while you get to where you can do it more nuanced.
Right.
One of the things I thought was really interesting was just because I guess I haven't had this experience a lot reading a book by somebody that I kind of know because I've talked to you a couple times, and so like stuff in a few places would pop out where I was like, oh, I know where that comes from.
Yeah.
I mean you've got a kid who reads comic books, and his mother wants to be a writer, and you've got a lot of writing stuff in there. And I gotta tell you, I kind of laughed out loud at the moment where Charlie makes a Green Lantern reference to the librarian, and the librarian just looks at him like a white sheet. He has no idea what he's talking about. And I was like, yeah, I liked that a lot. That was great.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of me in Charlie. I think he handles these terrifying situations a little better than I ever would, but I'd like he's the kid I wish I had been,
Mm-hmm.
But so there's a lot of me in there, and that's just there's the write what you know is I'm trying, I feel like I can bring some realism to that character by
Exactly. That's how you make it more credible.
Right.
Absolutely. Job stuff, school stuff.
Yeah, and those
things
are
like that.
And
I guess this is becoming more of a talk about just generally how to write.
Well, and that's all these conversations usually end up in that way, end up there at some point. But yeah, I think that's something that someone who's writing a story should, an aspiring writer should definitely keep in mind is you can build a lot of credibility just by doing these little nuances here and there that may not necessarily seem to play a huge role in the story, but can definitely draw the reader in to some degree.
So when I was a kid, I was reading a lot of the kind of commercial teen marketed kind of stuff. I was the Animorphs guy, and I was the. Yeah, I mean you're a little bit older than I am, but I mean I was no, I'm just saying that. I mean like I was a kid when that stuff was out, and I was the age group it was marketed to. So I was reading that, and I was reading Goosebumps and things like that, and so I've been out of the scene for a long time and not really paying attention to the teen book market. So I wanted to ask you like what is the market like now? Like how many kids are buying this kind of stuff these days?
If you walk through a bookstore, through the young adult section, it is more diverse and broad and interesting than I think it has ever been. There are just so many different types of books, ranging from nonfiction to slice of life fiction to a lot of fantasy, and some horror. I think, I've read a lot of the stuff I read is horror. I'm kind of say it's not. It doesn't ring true as horror to me once I actually read it.
What is it? What is it more like?
I think it's more dark. A lot of it's more dark fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there are some pretty dark horror novels. I think leaning towards the older readers, the more teen side of things. I think there's some out there that are pretty dark. I mean, the Goosebumps books, for instance, and they've been around for forever.
Mm-hmm.
They're horror stories, but like you said, it's kind of horror light. Going into those that nothing bad's really going
to happen to anybody, and it's also a little non sequitur a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Where like you get through and you're like, I don't really know why anything happened. I mean, they were fun reads. I'm not.
I love them. Yeah, I love them.
I still really enjoy them, but
I have a huge stack of them on my bookcase.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I still have a stack of the Goosebumps books up on my bookshelf.
See, now I actually kind of wonder what our age difference is, but I'm not going to ask you.
I'm too old for the Goosebumps books.
Okay, see, I thought so, but all right.
I was too old when they came out. I was too old for it.
But you read them anyway.
Well, I read them a little bit. I mean, it was even 10 years later. 10 years after their heyday, when I started really looking at wanting to write, towards a younger market. I started reading a lot of that stuff, and I read a lot of the.
Sense. I mean, you gotta know what's out there.
Right. So I read a lot of them at that point. But now there are just books for young readers that have just some really amazing. There's science fiction that has some great concepts. There's a lot of cool fantasy stories, and some have some, these are books that a lot of times have, consequences to the actions of the characters and things. I mean, there's a lot that don't hold back for the reader. And I
So,
think
so you're saying that the medium is really actually progressed and is not stagnated?
no, I don't. I do not think it's stagnated. I think like everything else, something comes out that's super popular, and they feed on that. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of vampire books right now,
Oh yeah.
and a lot of fairy books that are really thinly veiled vampire novels, and stuff like that. But it's still, there's a lot of other stuff out there too. Readers now, young readers now have a really great wealth of books they can turn to.
Yeah, I kind of, and I just don't know. I sort of sometimes wonder, with all the other entertainment available, just how many of them really take advantage of that.
Well, it's interesting. I just went to
Because you always hear people say that kids don't read anymore, and I always just sort of wonder just how true that is. Because I think it's really hard to know, really. I mean, without
I think there's
doing a lot of research and figuring out what sales numbers are and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and that's never been something I've been good at looking at. I've never been good at analyzing sales figures.
No, I'm admitting I have not done this, so I'm just wondering, really.
And there's a lot of stuff competing for their time too.
Yes, exactly.
There's TV, and even TV's not video games and all these other things, and even beyond that, you've got some kids who have such an active calendar.
Oh yeah.
It amazes me that when I was a kid, I didn't have anything going on except hanging out with my buddies. But a lot of kids now have really active calendars in terms of stuff they're doing for school or extracurricular. I mean,
their date books have date books.
Yeah, they're super busy. It's definitely true that there's a lot competing for the attention of the reader. A few weeks ago, I actually went and presented some stuff at a high school and a middle school, and I presented a few different classes, and I went and talked to the librarians and stuff at the schools. And I got to tell you, I was amazed at these kids and at the library. I wish my library when I was a kid had been anything like these two libraries I went to.
Wow.
Because they had such a good selection of books on, oftentimes on what is a limited budget. They had a great selection of books. And then when I presented to these kids, in particular the middle reading, the people at the junior high, these kids were so engaged and interested. There were a couple of them there that had already read my book, that had already picked it out, and that the middle school actually did this is something that we never did, and I can't remember what it's called exactly, but they do these tests for books that you get extra credit, I guess, for completing these tests based on books that you've read, and they had put one together for Crooked Hills.
Wow.
To encourage the kids to read. So the school was really going out of their way to encourage kids to read. And to read my book too, which was awesome. But these kids were just really engaged. They were asking some really interesting questions, some questions that that actually got me to think a little bit. And and I was sitting there talking to these kids, and the whole time I'm thinking, if this had been someone coming to my middle school when I was a kid, it would have been dead silence. I don't think we would have been engaged at all. And I think now that it is, it's a testament to the these kids are just so bright these days. Anyway, they're a lot brighter than I think they're a lot brighter than people give them credit for. And two, it's a testament to the teachers and the teachers' abilities to really get them.
Yeah, it sounds like their curriculum must be really good.
To get them really engaged. And I was listening to these teachers who were, having conversations with kids that you could tell that these teachers knew what the kids were interested in. They knew what made these kids tick. And I think that it really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, it sounds like they were really driving home critical thinking in that way and all that, yeah.
I really liked that because it was nothing like I had when I was in high school or junior high for that matter.
Wow, that's really positive. I had no idea you were going to say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, going into these schools, I don't know that I expected it. And then talking to the librarians, and they were telling me about their, getting these books in and the stuff they're really trying to get their kids to read. And I mean, these were really, it was really kind of inspiring. That said, it's a tough market. It's a very competitive market to get stuff published in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's easier to, it's not easier to publish than it ever has been, but it's easier to, put something together that looks published, than it ever has. Self-publishing is everywhere now, and anybody can easily put literature out there or,
Right.
put videos out there. I know this from experience.
Well, it is. It's changing. It's changing drastically, and
I think the independent market is bigger than it ever has been.
oh, definitely, and I think it will continue to grow. A few years ago, if you'd have told, walked in, I used to go to a lot of writing conventions, especially the horror writer conventions, and
Sure.
if you walked in and said, "I'm going to self-publish a book," they wouldn't have necessarily laughed in your face, but they would have definitely laughed behind your back. And
Sure.
myself included. I really look down on self-publishing. But now there are people who are publishing, self-publishing some great stuff, and they're making, they're making money doing it. They're giving the traditional publishers a huge run for their money through self-publishing. I probably think about it at least a couple of times a day about the self-publishing trend and these people who are making, their circumstances are different than mine, but they're doing very well for themselves in self-publishing, and it's a real interesting time, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and what's cool about that is you start venturing out and looking at independent stuff, and because there's not that oversight that you have with published work, I mean, you get really interesting things that you wouldn't have otherwise seen, because publishers, and I mean this is, and again, this is not a problem, but I mean when you're a publisher, you usually publish a particular kind of thing, and so you're looking for obviously we publish horror, so we're looking for this kind of horror. We publish science fiction, and then if you're self-publishing and you're writing one thing, you write anything you want to, and if you can get people interested in it, then it's out there, and suddenly you have something that maybe nobody ever would have picked up because it just wasn't their niche.
Right. It's you also, the risk is you can also get some really bad stuff. You can get some really awesome stuff. But a lot of the people who are really making it in self-publishing, they're investing in editors to look over their books. They're investing. They're investing.
Yeah, the process is not that different.
Right.
Just as far as what makes the novel good and successful, I would make the assumption that it's not that different. It's just that the actual publishing part of it is different.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, but it's definitely an interesting time in the realm of publishing. Like I said, I haven't figured out the self-publishing thing yet. But it's not it was something I was probably opposed to in the very theory of it, and now I kind of wish I had something to try it with. I've done. I put a short or a novella on Kindle and things like that, but I haven't really gotten into it too much.
Well, Cullen, we're nearly out of time. Once again, I just wanted to say that I really, really enjoyed the book, and we'll definitely get the next one. I'd love to sit here and talk to you with you about it, but I just don't want to give anything away. I kind of feel like there's not much I could say without giving the whole book away, because it's really cohesive. It's the kind of book where everything kind of comes together at the end. And I wanted to praise you for that too, because like most good books of its kind, you'll set some things up early on that feel like they're inconsequential, and they pop up again toward the end for major plot points.
Well, yeah, I didn't want to.
It's really well plotted.
Well, thank you. Even though it's a book for young readers, I didn't dumb it down. I think a lot of writers may dumb things down for that age group, and I wanted to tell a good, solid story that anybody could enjoy, regardless of their age. And I wanted it to have some genuine scares in it, instead of just being sort of a lighthearted, spooky story. I wanted it to actually have some scary stuff in it, and hopefully I succeeded in that. So far the reviews seem to be pretty positive.
Yeah, I was gonna say I have read a few, and nearly all of them that I've read have said that very thing, that it's not dumbed down. So you should be glad that you're getting that, because that's what you're really going for. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pleased with that, and like I said, those reviews are written by adults, which I like that adults are reading the book and enjoying it. But then going to the school and talking to some kids who had actually read the book and getting their opinions on it was really nice too, because it just showed me that I had written the story I intended to write, because they were kind of keying on the things I wanted them to key on.
Well, and I would think that would be probably the most challenging part. I don't know if it was or not, but I mean, to me, I think even just at 27, I think it would be difficult to go back now and try to write a book in the guise of a modern teenager, because I don't know what going to school is like now versus what it was in the early 2000s. I mean, it can't have changed that much, but I mean, every now and then I'll talk to kids and I'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, it just seems like certain things are quite a bit different. And I mean, like, you do have some references to things here and there where it's like, okay, this is not entirely timeless. I mean, like, you are definitely trying to root it in modern times. You know, you got a kid with a DS. I mean,
yeah, but even that's kind of,
even that's dated now. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's
the world works in internet time now. You put it in a book tomorrow and it's going to be outdated by Thursday.
Luckily, Crooked Hills is a town I'm assuming doesn't get very good internet access. And
I felt like you were deliberately doing that too, where it was like, I'm setting this in a place where I don't have to deal with technology.
To some degree, maybe so. I mean, I'm not. It's you're absolutely right. It's tough to, Well, I even said, if the way it was when I was in middle school is completely different than these kids now.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how I got into the mindset that I wanted to, of this character, except I didn't try to write him. I didn't try to write the character, the kids in the book. I didn't want to write as I envisioned a kid to be. That could be. I think that's the kiss of death for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
They write. What ends up being their stereotypical kid. So I tried to focus more on the things that are timeless about being a kid, and I focused on those things with the characters, and instead of trying to make it hip to a lot of things that it would end up falling on my flat on my face if I tried to do that. So there are elements of being scared that are the same, that were the same for me as they are for kids today,
Yeah, absolutely.
So I focused on those things.
And it wasn't shock factor. I mean, that's what I really appreciated about it. It wasn't like, oh, there's a dude who gets his head chopped off, so I'm scared of that. It was you don't know what's going to happen. And so then certain things that if you didn't set it up right might not seem that scary were much scarier because of all the misdirection.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to go for some of those kind of ghost story elements and Lovecraftian elements and things like that instead.
Yeah, and in that sense, it definitely is timeless. It was very much more, the traditional horror literature kind of thing, which
sure.
I was really glad you went that direction.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's probably the only direction that works for this kind of story, in my opinion, at least for me.
Well, everybody be sure to pick up Crooked Hills. Where's the best place to get it, Colin?
It's available in print. Amazon's a great place to check it out. You can check out the publisher's website is earwigpress.com, but you can get the book in trade paperback from Amazon. You can also get it for the Kindle through Amazon. You can get it for the Nook. So if you're a Barnes and Noble shopper, so it's you can get it for iBooks. So it's out there digitally if you read digitally, or you can definitely order it from Amazon in trade paperback.
Well, Cullen, it was great having you on the program. Thanks a lot for being with me. And everybody, thanks a lot, as always, for listening to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan, and I'll see you next time.